YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here, back in Total War Rome 2, and this is going to be the third installment of my beginner's guide. And we're going to talk a little bit more about potential ways to improve your game. And I'm going to do a little bit more about on the battlefield maneuvering in this one, and then in the next one I'm going to actually cover some campaign basics. So we're going to go through a few more videos for beginners, but I wanted to come in here and show you a replay. So I think the person I came up against here is a beginner, and if they're not, clearly they're struggling with good army choices. And someone would be like, "Heir, you're a jerk." I don't mean it to be a jerk. I'm trying to be helpful here. I came up against Rome, and I have to assume that someone knows how to use Rome properly, so I brought a barbarian sword spam, which is a great way to counter Rome, especially since it's a wide open map. And then I saw my opponent's army, and I felt pretty bad because clearly my opponent probably hasn't figured out that the Boii can bring this type of punishing force, and he's doing a lot of things to me that strike me that he's a new player. Now, if he's not, I apologize, but one way or the other, I'm going to give you some tips to help make your gameplay better. There's going to be a few things you're going to see here, and I'm just going to walk through these. Let's go ahead and just leave it on play. My opponent is playing against the Boii, who boast a large number of swords, so the lesson here is to be familiar with the factions in the game. Now, if you're new, this is going to take time, and you're not going to be perfect at it. But you might want to just check out my faction-focused videos as they come out. I will give you a little information about these factions, but the Boii are a sword-heavy faction. Rome is also a sword-heavy faction. The Boii are going to excel on open maps where they can get their charges in, whereas Rome is probably going to actually do better on a forested map where it's harder for the barbarians to get a full-speed charge in the forest. My opponent brings 3 heavy spears versus the Boii. This is folly. And the reason it is, yes, the Boii field good cavalry, but this is a lot of money to tie up in spears that are no doubt going to end up having to face swordsmen at some point in the battle, because the Boii can bring a lot of swordsmen. So never, ever, ever bring this many heavy spears against a sword-heavy faction, unless you have some good faith guess or understanding that your opponent isn't going to come sword-heavy and he's going to come cav-heavy, but that wouldn't make sense with the Boii. The Boii can actually do both. But the thing is you're going to need infantry to stop the Boii infantry, and Triarii are not going to be able to provide that. My opponent has cavalry over here too, so his cavalry is running in the flying wedge formation. Effectively, all this does is make your cavalry slower. It does increase their attack a little bit, but it does it at the cost of defense, so you really don't gain a whole lot out of it. It boosts your charge bonus just barely, but the shape of the formation and the way that it takes place on the charge actually lessens your charge to the extent that it's not really worth it. I sometimes will use the flying wedge formation because for whatever reason, it seems like, and it could just be a perceived thing for me, that it makes the cavalry engagement last a little longer sometimes when the Roman cavalry is outmatched. I could be wrong. If there's anybody who knows how to substantiate that, though, let me know. Do not use your cavalry in wedge or flying wedge or diamond formation. I see no point in it. It's definitely not going to help new players. The only reason why I see people use this very often and to any degree of success is because it does compact your formation, as you can see, and sometimes that's useful for pulling through a gap in an enemy line, but then you would immediately want to come out of that formation. So that's the first tip that I want to give you all that my opponent is doing wrong. Or, sorry, the second. The first one was obviously don't bring the Triarii versus a sword-heavy faction. Bringing the skirmishers is fine. The Boii aren't very good at skirmishing, and you could potentially use that to snipe an Oathsworn general, which would give you a handy advantage in a fight against the Boii, as all barbarian factions suffer pretty badly when their general dies. So not necessarily a bad choice, but still risky because you're going to have to make that happen. Eagle cohorts do provide a morale increase for nearby Roman units, but as a unit, they are pretty crappy for the price you pay. You're better off just to spend all your money on veteran legionaries or on Evocati cohort, and my opponent has no infantry meat shields here. So again, 2 things that my opponent did very wrong in the choosing of this. He's using Triarii almost for a meat shield. These guys are very expensive, and they are going to get owned by the Boii swords. Even Celtic warriors here are going to do a considerable amount of damage to the Triarii. He puts them in defensive testudo, which this is not a formation that is meant to withstand a charge. The defensive testudo, let's take a look at it here, unless it gives a bracing bonus, but I still don't think, yeah, it does. It gives a bracing bonus, but it's really not going to help a whole lot because you're going to get surrounded. Look at this, Eagle cohort getting charged by Celtic warriors. Again, really bad engagements. for the Roman here, but he doesn't have a choice because he hasn't brought the right units. As a Roman facing a barbarian sword spam, you must bring Hastati. You need Hastati. They are cheap and they are pretty good for the price, and they can give the barbarian meat shields a good run for their money. Against Celtic warriors, they do struggle, but it is much better than what you're seeing here. Stack up on veteran legionaries and Hastati, or a ton of legionaries and Hastati, and just bring cavalry. And if you have to bring spears to support your cavalry, I really don't like auxiliary infantry, but they're okay-ish. I would say the gladiator spears would be preferable, but again, remember the gladiator spears are vulnerable to enemy swords and also to skirmish fire. The Romans do have their work cut out for them. Also, if you're going to be the Romans, my opponent is fighting in formation attack. Do not fight in formation attack against the barbarians and get surrounded like this. It's going to go poorly for you. Formation attack is only good if you want your men to hold longer. They do not charge as well, and they can't spread out as well. And you're going to get outflanking penalties. See how my guys are basically attacking the Romans in the back here? Under missile fire, unit winning. They're actually winning here because they're against Celtic warriors. But yeah, the Eagle cohort taking a thrashing from the those guys. So yes, just a few tips for you here in this battle. Again, my opponent chooses Praetorian Cav against the Boii. Why? So again, as a new player, you might be like, well, why not, Heir? They're a lot better than Heavy Cav. They are. They're a lot better than the Heavy Horse provided by the Boii. And again, he's running them in this wedge formation. Don't run them in the wedge formation. So Praetorian Cav are not going to be useful a whole lot. They cost a ton, and melee cavalry takes a long time to get its kills, like this Praetorian Cav has, and by the time it gets its kills, I can continue to interrupt it with other Heavy Horse, and it's so expensive, and yes, it's killing Heavy Horse, but even if the Praetorian Cav kills 2 full Heavy Horse units, it's only just paid for itself, and in the meantime, it can do nothing to support the infantry fight. These naked warriors would have been an easy target for the enemy Balearic slingers, but instead I'm able to kind of chase away the Balearic slingers with Levy Freeman, which again is a very cheap unit that the barbarians can use to great advantage against Rome, and get a rear charge with the naked warriors, which is going to absolutely annihilate this Eagle cohort. So again, think about the matches that you're going into as a new player. You really need to learn about the factions, spend some time looking at their rosters and understanding them. You don't have to be perfect, but just get a feel for which factions are good at what. Are they good with cavalry? Are they good with skirmishers? Are they good with charging? Are they good with swords? Are they low armor units? Are they high armor units? Just get to know the factions just a little bit, and that will pay dividends to you in battles into not letting this happen to you. So I'm going to fast forward through the rest. My opponent just gets absolutely destroyed here, and it's not because of some major skill on my part. There's a lot in Rome 2 that has to do with your army pick, and to be honest, there are some army picks that will undo a whole lot of skill. There are sometimes army picks or faction picks to where it doesn't matter how much skill you have, you're probably not going to win that battle. So just knowing which factions to not pick and how to pick which factions you do can go a long ways into aiding you into having some victories. The Romans had no chance here with this army, absolutely none. I could completely misuse this Boii army in almost every way and still win this battle. And so again, I don't want you all to get into those situations because it creates a lot of issues. 5 spearmen versus the Boii. No, not against a heavy sword faction. Hastati will serve you much better in that role. Anyway, so this is a beginner one. I have talked in my last about formations and special abilities, and then in the one before that I talked about basic movement orders on the battlefield. Let's talk a little bit more about some maneuvers and ways to defeat enemies more effectively. I'm going to be testing against the AI, which is going to make this pretty dang easy, but let's do a demonstration here. I'm going to pick some factions here. That was a barbarian against Rome. Let's pick Rome here, just because this will be a little fun bit here. And the AI is going to do terrible, but let's give them a pretty good army and see if I'm able to overcome it. So we'll go in here and give the barbarians the Arverni here. It's on an open map. I will make them the defenders, or no, actually, let's make them the attackers so that they actually come out against me. And we're going to give them a good army. I'm going to give them a couple of Oathsworn, a nice line of chosen swords here. Let's give them one more. And then we're going to give them some Celtic warriors to run interference. Again, the AI probably won't manage to use these units right, but we'll give them some Levy Freeman. And we're going to give them some heavy horse. Sorry, not noble horse, heavy horse. So this is a formidable Gallic army. for the Romans to take on. There's a lot of sword power charging. Levy Freeman can be very disruptive. 2 Oathsworn. This is a very formidable, and I'll even give him Vercingetorix here. And of course I have the AI on the normal mode, which means that it should be relatively balanced. Of course the AI sucks in their maneuvering, and I'm going to give you a little bit of tips on how you can use maneuvering to help yourself gain an advantage. Now as the Romans, I'm going to bring 5 Hastati. I want to go very cost effective here, so I'm going to start rolling in, let's see what the difference here is. So a little more melee defense, but a little less armor. I'm going to go with the Principes. I've got 8 Principes here. May even want more. This is technically considered spam, and most tournaments probably wouldn't allow this, but I'm going to do it. But we're not in a tournament, I'm just teaching you how to play online, and I've got 4 Soki Equites. So I'm going to return sword spam with sword spam here. This is very dangerous against the Arverni, but as you can see, the Arverni have just as much infantry as me, but mine's all sword, whereas they have some spears. That's going to give them some, and again, Levy Freeman are potentially very useful units. But this is also going to give me 15 infantry units. The Arverni probably have 16, they do. But all of mine are heavy swords, and the Arverni only have so many heavy swords, and some of theirs are light swords. Again, I'm not necessarily saying this is a good pick online. This is still a very challenging way to beat the Romans. And to be honest, you could do something like getting rid of those Soki Equites and just give in to the fact that you're going to lose the sword fight or the cavalry fight. You could go with something much cheaper like the Equites or this Legionary Cav. So let's say that I went with Equites. You could then trade out a bunch of these Principes for veteran legionaries, which they are considerably more expensive but pack a lot more wallop. So say for instance I could get 4 veteran legionaries as well and just go in different lines here. So let's try this. So the biggest dangers you would face in an online battle from an Arverni army like this is those heavy horse outmatch your cav, and eventually they're going to get behind your lines. They could also interrupt the charges of your infantry. I do not expect the AI to do any of that. It is nighttime, which actually is probably not very good for the barbarians. So just maneuvering. You don't want to get surrounded on the battlefield, and a lot of times you're going to see people spreading their armies very thin. They're doing this because it makes it harder for their army to be outflanked. There are penalties for it, though. The penalties would be that your men are going to have less bracing when they're spread out, and they are potentially easier for cav to knock down and to charge through. So that is the risk that you're going to run whenever you hold your guys in multiple lines like this. But I'm going to do multiple lines because it's going to be harder for the barbarians to get effective charges against multiple lines of my infantry. It does not guarantee you victory, but again, let's think about this a little bit. The barbarians rely on their charges to beat Roman swords, whereas Roman swords rely on staying power and high attack. So I'm going to take all my guys out of formation attack because I don't want that in this particular case. I have my guys spread thin, so it's harder for the barbarians to get around me. I'm going to keep my cavalry in reserve, and I'm going to keep my general safely in the back. I didn't even bring the Caesar general here, which was absolutely stupid. I should have brought the Caesar general for demonstration purposes. But again, so see how I have a very compact or a very dense formation here. If the barbarians go completely YOLO, they're going to get eaten alive by javelins from my Principes and potentially from my veteran legionaries. So it's just kind of a way to help dissuade a barbarian from wanting to charge you. However, because I'm 3 lines deep, the barbarians could go single line and completely outflank me, which is actually what you're seeing the barbarians threaten to do at this point. Because again, the AI is stupid and doesn't know the correct way to maneuver to get itself out of a paper bag. But again, we're just going to demonstrate some maneuvering. So again, see how I'm spread out thin? It's going to make it harder for the barbarians to outflank me. I can then use some of the movement tips that I gave you in past videos to keep my men moving together. So I'm going to keep my cavalry behind my men. I don't know what the AI is going to try and do. They sometimes try and maneuver to outflank you a little, but the AI is typically pretty incompetent. I can just group my guys and easily turn to face. The AI is trying to make its way towards my flank. That's a pretty typical maneuver. As the barbarians too, if you can get them tired, it helps because that's going to reduce their melee effectiveness and charge. Your own men, it's best to walk them if you have to go on a long distance. Don't let your Romans get tired because then when it comes to prolonged combat, if they're not tired, their melee attacks will be more effective. So again, infantry in multiple lines, I can defend from multiple directions. The AI is now just completely moving towards the red line. even though they're set to attack, and it's because they don't want to attack into the face of my formation here. Again, that's just the AI. But again, you can see how my formation can be used to just face down the enemy, and I'm going to continually make sure that I'm not allowing myself to be outflanked. Outflanking is when an opponent moves to get around the side of your army. It employs morale penalties on your men when they're attacked from the flank or the rear. So it's always good to make sure that you're maneuvering to try and keep your flanks secure. Pick your army in a way that helps keep your flanks secure, and always just make sure that you're doing your best to keep enemies off your flanks. I don't even know if the AI is going to attack me or if they're just going to keep marching around in circles. Good grief, these guys are stupid. Artificial unintelligence at work here. So my Romans are going to get tired if I keep chasing these guys too, so I need to rest. See how my guys are winded? It's time for me to rest. So I'm going to let my men sit here, and if the AI wants to attack, they can. I should be able to get some of my stamina back, but you see how my running there has actually made my men winded. This is a very bad thing. I should not have allowed this to happen. I should have been walking. But the good thing for me is that the AI is also getting worn out, so hopefully if my men can stand here and rest for a second, they can regain some of their stamina prior to the attack. Enemy cavalry is going to try and move to my flank. It's good to use your infantry to support your cav, especially in a situation like this where the Romans... So see how I'm going to pause it real quick. Again, the AI is going to make a retarded move here and just charge, kind of YOLO charge in. But see how I'm pointing infantry to get javelins off at incoming enemies, and when I have the weaker cav, my own cavalry, notice how I'm going to keep them behind an infantry unit. This is so that an enemy unit can't use their charges to be effective. This is called screening. So you can use a unit to screen others. So I'm screening the equites from the attack of the heavy horse with my veteran legionaries. Screening is even more effective when you have a unit with javelins to help counter enemies. So anyway, that's a screening maneuver, whereas what the enemy is trying here is a outflanking maneuver, but of course it's not going to be very effective because they are moving around way before they have a lot of infantry support. My men have regained some of their stamina, and the enemy is going to charge me here. So they're going to charge me, and my Hastati are going to take a lot of punishment. The Romans do have javelins, and I'm going to just kind of give you again some tips here. I'm going to put it in slow motion just so I can show you how to issue some orders. So see how these heavy horse came in too early? Attack them with infantry, and then follow up with cavalry. So see, my infantry is going to make sure the heavy horse can't countercharge me. And then over here, I'm going to be charged by the enemy, so issue countercharge orders where you can. And then the infantry that's behind them, scoot it up so that they can throw their javelins into the enemy during the fight. So see how my infantry is going to scoot up and they're going to be within javelin range. And this is going to be devastating to the enemy units. And it's going to really help me do some extra damage before the fight with my second line starts. So this is why you can use like a multiple line formation and still be effective against enemies, always keeping units in reserve. Because then enemies that rely heavily on charge are going to have a hard time getting the charges they need, and they're going to get javelins dispersed all over them before the fight ever begins, because my guys are in fire at will here. So see how my men are throwing javelins into the enemy troops that have engaged or gotten blobbed up. So this is going to allow me to get a lot of kills, and again, the enemy's going to get bad charges. So again, just let your men sit there. Let them discharge those javelins. Again, I've got a third line moved up for support, so the Arverni are going to get tied up in a lot of engagements that they really don't want to be in. So, and again, my men being out of formation attack means that they can outflank better, and they can help match the formation of the Arverni. They also do better in cavalry fights when they're out of formation attack. My men have been able to discharge a number of javelins here, and I'm just going to let them keep trying to discharge those javelins. And as my front line of Hastati start to drop, this is when you'd want to move in your second line of Principes, now that the enemy will be robbed of their charge bonus. The enemy cavalry was destroyed because, again, did you notice how I had infantry support? The enemy cavalry did not use infantry support. So that's another good way. Always support your cavalry with infantry. And notice how I'm going to be able, again, the enemy will not get charges against me here with their Oathsworn or other units.
The men are wavering.
And they have allowed me to gain a cavalry supremacy, and they have lost their flanks. So the AI did not use the better charge of their Arverni units. They did not use the proper positioning, and notice how I'm going to punish them for this. I reinforce only once the Arverni can't get their charges, so now all their units are going to get bogged down in long-term combat with Roman units who have high armor, high morale, and high attack. This is going to be a very bad position for the Arverni to be in. And then you can use outflanking maneuvers again with your cavalry. So once you've managed to support your cavalry and gain some advantage, you want to use that advantage for what's called the hammer and anvil strike, which is your infantry is the anvil and your cavalry is the hammer. So you deliver a crushing blow. Now, when running cavalry attacks, you're going to want to use what's called cycle charges. Charge in, don't leave them there for too long. So see how they charge in, they get a nice charge bonus. And then I'm going to cycle them back out. So I'm going to now pull them out and come around for another charge and just keep delivering the pain. Again, this cav unit's had time to knock down some enemy units, but I'm not going to leave them in prolonged combat. And I'm just going to keep cycling in and out with the charges. And you'll notice how that it's really devastating the morale of the Arverni at this point. And they're also losing the combat because of the way they engage. Now again, do not expect an enemy player to be as foolish as the AI, but maneuvering against the AI can be quite easy because you can learn how to take advantage of their movements. So again, the Arverni definitely had a better army here. They had all the tools that they needed to defeat Rome, and on the right map to defeat Rome. But because of maneuvering, I'm able to just absolutely crush the Arverni here. Again, the AI can't maneuver itself out of a paper bag. I get it. I'm not trying to like show off because I outmaneuvered. I'm just trying to show how effective maneuvering can badly hurt your opponent and very much help you. So you can see here that the opponent is just left with absolutely no recourse, and it's just getting completely and utterly slaughtered by my troops. So again, Arverni troops perfectly capable of taking on Rome on a flat ground map. But again, so notice here how I had some plans in place. I had plenty of Hastati to interrupt the tough charges of the Arverni. I had a second line of troops to get into a long grind out fight with troops once their charge had been interrupted. And then I had a third line of my most elite troops to really make it hard for the enemy to outgrind. And those third line of troops were also able to support my cavalry fight because my first two lines were able to do the holding for long enough. So again, against an enemy that's going to be high charge, multiple lines is definitely a good way to go against them. Always try and use outflanking maneuvers where possible, and always avoid being outflanked. So hopefully this gives you a little idea about how to maneuver. I mean, that was a crushing victory for Rome there, again against the AI, so not surprising. But you can see how in this case, Arverni technically have a better army, and they even had a better general's ability, and they get absolutely annihilated by this Roman army that I bring here. Now don't get me wrong, this is a decent Roman army. It's not great, but as far as rush on rush goes, the Arverni should technically win this in the hands of two equally skilled players. But that's the thing. Not everybody you play online is going to be of super high skill. Not everybody you play online is going to be able to outmaneuver you, so do what you can to win those fights. And by bringing this Roman army and knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are, I know they're weak on the charge, so I line them up to where it's hard to outflank them, and also to where enemy charges will be interrupted by my Hastati, and then the units that charge the Hastati are going to get fired on by my Principes with their javelins, and then my veteran legionaries again backing up the Principes, so I'm really making it difficult for the AI or anybody who would be in control of that army, because you'd really need to get a good charge against all those units to succeed. And when you have that many lines, it can be difficult to get those charges. Now again, I expect a human player would have used their cavalry much better and a lot less YOLO, just giving you some tips here. When units have javelins, make sure to use those. You can use them to screen cavalry, and you can use them to dissuade YOLO charges against the front of your infantry, because if you have a second line of javelin throwers right behind the first line who also throw javelins, enemy cavalry and infantry will be heavily punished for charging into that type of fire. So maneuvering, I think the basic maneuvers that I showed there, again, are just going to be screening. Screening is where you use one unit to screen the advance or attack of another. And you can also do some zoning maneuvers, so pikes could be used to zone out certain areas of the battlefield since they're impenetrable from the front. So I mean, you can just do different maneuvers like that. So get an understanding about how the maneuvering works. I've showed you the controls, and I've given you a little bit of tips here on how to keep yourself from being outmaneuvered, and just some of the basic maneuvers. Familiarize yourself with the hammer and anvil strike. It was an Alexandrian tactic where infantry acts as a sturdy wall, and the cavalry is the crushing hammer to smash the enemy infantry against that wall. So a very interesting tactic. It works really good where heavy infantry is the wall and the cavalry is the hammer, or the anvil is the infantry and the cavalry is the hammer. Outflanking maneuvers. Outflanking is very common. Again, I mentioned it's just where you move around the side of the enemy army to deliver some side charges or rear charges. So ensuring that you can get around the flank. Screening, again, I'll just cover it one more time, is where you use one unit to help the advance or attack of another. So for instance, like a levy freeman screening a heavy horse, the levy freeman can push away enemy cavalry and allow the heavy horse to advance without necessarily being threatened. So that would be one example. There's also lots of examples. You could use a hoplite to screen against a horse archer. So you could put a hoplite in between the horse archer and whatever its intended target is, whether it's an elephant or your own cavalry, in order to keep that horse archer out of range. That is a screening maneuver. We'll cover more of this. Hopefully this gives you a little bit better idea as far as maneuvers and how important they can be. Put some questions in the comments if you have questions about more specifically on different maneuvers, and maybe I can add it into the next video or one of the next videos. I think the next one I do after this will actually be campaign tips, but then I can do another one to follow up on the maneuvers if you want me to. Heir of Carthage, signing off for now.